In the dead of night, a flickering brass lantern swings from a shadowy porch, casting eerie glows that whisper of hidden sins and a killer's cold gaze. Welcome to the Brass Lantern, a beacon to murder, a Hercule Poirot mystery where every light reveals a darker secret. Grab a cup of tea, take a seat, and let the suspense unfold. If you're hooked on the twists, hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. Chapter 1. The arrival at Willowbrook Manor, the English countryside stretched out in a patchwork of mist and moonlight, its rolling hills cloaked in an autumn chill that seemed to whisper secrets. Willowbrook Manor loomed at the heart of this quiet desolation, its ivy-clad stone walls and towering chimneys standing as a testament to wealth and history, yet tinged with an air of foreboding. It was October 1932, and Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective with his immaculate moustache and piercing grey eyes, stepped off the creaking platform of the village station. His polished shoes clicked against the cobblestones as he adjusted his hat, a telegram crumpled in his gloved hand. Sir Reginald Hargrove, a steel magnate whose name carried weight in London's industrial circles, had summoned him with a plea that was as urgent as it was vague. Threats of murder, cloaked in cryptic warnings, had shaken the man's nerve. Poirot, never one to resist a puzzle, had accepted the challenge, though he suspected the truth would be as tangled as the ivy on the manor's walls. The gravel driveway crunched underfoot as Poirot approached the manor, his eyes drawn to the brass lantern hanging above the grand oak door. It was no ordinary fixture. Crafted with meticulous care, its polished surface gleamed under the moonlight, etched with nautical designs of anchors and waves that seemed to tell a story of their own. The lantern swayed gently, its warm light cutting through the fog like a beacon guiding lost souls, or perhaps luring them to ruin. Sir Reginald met him at the threshold, a tall man in his late 50s, his face lined with worry and his handshake betraying a tremor. "Monsieur Poirot, thank God you're here," he said, his voice low and strained. "These letters, they speak of murder, of a light that will expose the guilty. I fear I'm marked for death." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind already sifting through the words for hidden meanings. Inside, the manor's opulent interior unfolded. A grand foyer with marble floors, a sweeping staircase, and walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced Hargrove ancestors. The air carried the scent of polished wood and old money, but beneath it lurked tension, sharp as a blade. Sir Reginald had gathered a small group of guests for what was meant to be a weekend retreat, though the atmosphere felt more like a gathering of suspects. Lady Eleanor Hargrove, Sir Reginald's wife, glided into the room, her elegance undeniable in a sapphire gown that matched her cool blue eyes. Her diamond necklace caught the chandelier's light, but her smile was tight, as if guarding a secret. Victor Langston, a brash American steel tycoon and Sir Reginald's business rival, lounged in an armchair, puffing a cigar and casting sharp glances around the room. His booming laugh grated against the manor's refined silence. Miss Clara Beaumont, a young novelist with a penchant for melodrama, clutched her notebook, her wide eyes darting as if she were already scripting the weekend's events. And Dr. Elias Thorne, the family physician, sat quietly in a corner, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the firelight as he toyed with his pocket watch, his expression unreadable. Over dinner in the oak-panelled dining hall, where silver candelabras cast flickering shadows, the conversation danced around pleasantries but crackled with unease. Poirot observed every gesture, every glance. Sir Reginald, seated at the head of the table, finally addressed the reason for Poirot's presence. "I've received 3 letters," he said, producing a small bundle from his pocket. Each was written in a precise, unfamiliar hand, sealed with red wax, bearing the imprint of a lantern. The words were chilling. "The brass light will shine on your sins, and retribution will follow." Poirot leaned forward, His fingers steepled. "What's in, Sir Reginald?" he asked, his voice calm but probing. The industrialist hesitated, his eyes flickering to his guests. "Business is a ruthless game, Monsieur Poirot. I've made enemies, men ruined by deals, workers cast aside in the name of progress. Perhaps one of them seeks revenge." Victor Langston snorted, blowing a plume of cigar smoke. "Reginald, you're too soft. Enemies are part of the trade." Lady Eleanor's hand trembled as she reached for her wine, while Clara scribbled furiously in her notebook, her pen scratching like an accusation. Poirot's mind whirred, cataloguing details. The letter's wax seal matched the lantern outside, a clue too deliberate to ignore. The dining room's heavy curtains swayed slightly, as if stirred by an unseen presence, and the fire crackled, casting fleeting glimpses of the guests' faces, each a potential mask hiding guilt. After dinner, the group retired to the drawing room, where brandy was poured and conversation grew strained. Poirot excused himself to inspect the manor's grounds, his cane tapping softly as he circled the porch. The brass lantern glowed steadily, its light revealing a faint scratch on its base. An initial, perhaps. He made a mental note to examine it further, but the night was not done with its surprises. Around midnight, a blood-curdling scream tore through the manor, jolting Poirot from his thoughts. He hurried downstairs, joined by the guests in various states of disarray. Lady Eleanor in a silk robe, Victor still clutching his cigar, Clara pale and trembling, Dr. Thorne eerily calm. On the porch, the brass lantern lay shattered, its glass fragments scattered like broken stars. And there, slumped in the doorway, was Sir Reginald, a dagger buried in his chest, his lifeless eyes staring at the wreckage of the lantern. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and glistening in the moonlight. The guests gasped, Clara stifled a sob, and Victor swore under his breath. Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved fingers brushing over the scene. A muddy footprint, too small for Sir Reginald's boots, marred the porch. A torn scrap of paper, bearing the same lantern seal, lay crumpled nearby, and the faint, lingering scent of cigar smoke hung in the air, though Victor stood too far to be its source. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed with questions. Who had wielded the dagger? Was it a calculated act of vengeance, or a crime of passion? The broken lantern seemed to mock them all, its light extinguished, but its secrets still burning. The police were summoned, their lanterns bobbing in the distance as they approached. But Poirot knew the truth lay within the manor's walls, among the guests now eyeing each other with suspicion. Lady Eleanor's composure cracked as she whispered, "Who could do this?" Victor's bravado faltered, his cigar now unlit. Clara clutched her notebook as if it held the answers, while Dr. Thorne adjusted his glasses, his silence louder than words. As the clock struck 1, Poirot straightened, his gaze sweeping over the group. "Mes amis," he said softly, "the brass lantern has indeed become a beacon to murder. But fear not. Hercule Poirot will uncover the truth." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, each wondering who among them hid a killer's heart. The stage was set, the clues were scattered, and the mystery deepened, pulling them all into its web. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where suspicions tighten and the shadows of Willowbrook Manor reveal their first secrets. Chapter 2. Shadows of Suspicion. The air in Willowbrook Manor hung heavy with dread as the first light of dawn crept through the tall windows, casting long, accusing shadows across the marble foyer. Hercule Poirot stood by the shattered remains of the brass lantern, now carefully gathered into a cloth by the local constable, who had arrived with a grim-faced inspector. The police had cordoned off the porch, their murmurs blending with the rustle of leaves outside. But Poirot's attention was fixed on the living, not the dead. The guests, summoned to the drawing room, sat in uneasy silence, their faces etched with shock, fear, or perhaps something more guarded. The detective's sharp eyes missed nothing. A twitch of a lip, a clenched fist, a glance too quickly averted. Murder had struck, and the killer was among them. Poirot began his inquiry with methodical precision, his voice cutting through the tension like a well-honed blade. He requested each guest to account for their movements the previous night, knowing that truth often hid in the cracks of carefully crafted stories. Lady Eleanor spoke first, her voice steady, but her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. She claimed to have retired to her room after dinner, reading until the scream woke her. Yet Poirot noted the faint smudge of ink on her sleeve. Had she been writing, not reading? Victor Langston, his usual bluster subdued, said he'd been smoking on the terrace, alone, until the commotion brought him running. The scent of his cigar lingered in Poirot's memory, too close to the crime scene for comfort. Miss Clara Beaumont, her notebook now tucked away, stammered that she'd been in the library, drafting her novel, lost in her own world. Her nervous fidgeting suggested otherwise. Dr. Elias Thorne, calm as ever, stated he'd been in his room, reviewing medical notes, though his pocket watch, stopped at 11:47, hinted at a disruption he hadn't mentioned. The drawing room's heavy curtains seemed to muffle their words, as if the manor itself conspired to keep secrets. Poirot paced slowly, his cane tapping a rhythm that set the guests on edge. He turned his attention to the torn letter fragment found near Sir Reginald's body, now in the inspector's possession. The scrap bore a single line in the same precise script as the threatening letters. "The light reveals all." Poirot requested to see the other letters, which Lady Eleanor retrieved from a locked desk drawer. Each was identical in tone, warning of retribution, but the third contained a new detail, a reference to a debt from the sea. Poirot's mind seized on this phrase. What maritime connection tied to Sir Reginald's past? Had his steel empire crossed paths with ships or sailors, perhaps in a way that bred vengeance? As the morning wore on, Poirot ventured to the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound books and a faint, musty scent. Clara had mentioned working there, so he examined the desk where she claimed to have sat. A blotter bore fresh ink stains, but no manuscript pages, only a crumpled sheet with a single word. Lantern. Had Clara been writing her novel, or something else entirely? Nearby, a window overlooked the porch, offering a clear view of where the brass lantern had hung. Poirot tested the latch. It opened silently, suggesting easy access to the crime scene. A faint scuff mark on the sill, barely noticeable, hinted at someone climbing through. Someone light, perhaps, given the shallow impression. Returning to the drawing room, Poirot questioned the guests about Sir Reginald's business dealings, probing for the debt from the sea. Victor admitted to a failed partnership years ago, a shipping venture that collapsed when Sir Reginald pulled funding, leaving Victor's investors ruined. Water under the bridge, Victor said, but his tight jaw told another story. Lady Eleanor mentioned her husband's early days in Liverpool, overseeing steel shipments for naval contracts, but she dismissed any lingering grudges. Dr. Thorne, when pressed, recalled treating a sailor once, a man injured in a dockyard accident linked to Hargrove's company, though he claimed the details were hazy. Clara, oddly silent, avoided Poirot's gaze, her fingers brushing her pocket, as if guarding something. The detective's scrutiny shifted to the muddy footprint on the porch, which the inspector had cast in plaster. It was small, likely a woman's or a slender man's, and the tread pattern suggested a dress shoe, not a boot. Poirot glanced at Clara's delicate slippers and Lady Eleanor's elegant heels, then at Dr. Thorne's polished loafers. Victor's heavy boots were too large to match. The clue narrowed the field, but Poirot knew better than to leap to conclusions. Misdirection was a murderer's best friend. As noon approached, a maid discovered a new clue in the garden. A single brass screw, etched with the same nautical design as the lantern, half buried in the soil near the porch steps. Poirot examined it closely, noting its shine, recently dropped, not weathered. Had it fallen during the lantern's destruction, or was it deliberately placed to mislead? The detective pocketed the screw, his mind turning to the manor's staff. The butler, a stoic man named Hawkins, reported that the lantern had been polished daily, its screws checked weekly, yet one was missing, and Hawkins swore no one had tampered with it, or so he claimed. The guests grew restless, their alibis fraying under Poirot's relentless questions. Lady Eleanor excused herself, citing a headache, but Poirot caught her glancing at Victor with something like fear. Clara, scribbling again, seemed to shrink under scrutiny, while Dr. Thorne's calm demeanour felt almost too composed. Victor, lighting another cigar, muttered about leaving, but the inspector barred anyone from departing until the investigation progressed. The manor felt like a cage, each guest a predator or prey, and Poirot the hunter stalking the truth. As the day waned, Poirot stood alone on the porch, the crime scene now cleared but its echoes lingering. The broken lantern, the cryptic letters, the muddy footprint, all pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit. The debt from the sea gnawed at him, a thread leading to Sir Reginald's past, perhaps to a betrayal that had festered for years. The killer had struck once, but would they stop? Poirot's little grey cells hummed, sensing the danger was far from over. The next chapter will unravel more of Willowbrook's secrets as Poirot digs deeper into hidden motives and buried truths. Chapter 3. The Tide of Secrets. The afternoon sun hung low over Willowbrook Manor, its golden rays doing little to warm the chill that had settled over the house. Hercule Poirot stood in the library, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his eyes tracing the rows of books as if they might whisper answers. The murder of Sir Reginald Hargrove had cast a shadow over the manor, and the guests, now confined by the inspector's orders, moved like chess pieces on a board only Poirot could see. The brass screw found in the garden, the cryptic phrase, "debt from the sea," and the small footprint haunted his thoughts. The truth was close, yet veiled, and he knew the next move required uncovering the past. Poirot began by summoning the butler, Hawkins, whose rigid posture and clipped responses suggested a man accustomed to discretion. The detective questioned him about the brass lantern's history. Hawkins revealed it was a gift from a Liverpool shipbuilder, a token of gratitude for Sir Reginald's steel shipments during the Great War. The shipbuilder, a man named Captain Amos Reed, had vanished years ago after a dispute with Hargrove over unpaid contracts. Poirot's moustache twitched. Here was a link to the sea. "This Captain Reed," Poirot asked, "did he leave family, perhaps someone who might harbour resentment?" Hawkins hesitated, then admitted Reed had a daughter, though her whereabouts were unknown. The detective made a mental note to pursue this lead. Next, Poirot turned to the guests' belongings, requesting the inspector's permission to search their rooms discreetly. In Lady Eleanor's chamber, he found a locked jewellery box, its key hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Inside, alongside glittering gems, was a faded photograph of a young Eleanor with a man in a sailor's uniform signed Amos, 1915. The discovery raised questions. Was Lady Eleanor connected to Captain Reed? Her poised demeanour now seemed a fragile mask. In Victor Langston's room, Poirot uncovered a ledger detailing a failed shipping deal with Hargrove, marked by angry scribbles and a circled debt of thousands. Victor's motive grew clearer, but his brash openness made Poirot wary. Guilt was rarely so loud. Miss Clara Beaumont's room offered a different puzzle. Her notebook, left open on a desk, contained not a novel, but frantic sketches of the brass lantern, its nautical etchings meticulously copied. Tucked between pages was a letter, unsealed, addressed to father and signed C. The letter spoke of righting wrongs and the light that burns for justice. Poirot's pulse quickened. Could Clara be Reed's daughter, seeking vengeance? Yet her nervous demeanour suggested fear as much as intent. Dr. Thorne's room was sparse, save for a medical journal with a dog-eared page on poisons, an odd choice for a man who claimed to focus on routine ailments. His stopped pocket watch, still at 11:47, gnawed at Poirot. Had it been deliberately tampered with to fake an alibi? Returning to the drawing room, Poirot orchestrated a subtle confrontation, asking the guests about Captain Amos Reed. Lady Eleanor's face drained of colour, and she claimed only a passing acquaintance from her youth. Victor laughed, dismissing Reed as a failed dreamer who couldn't handle business. Clara's eyes widened briefly before she buried her nose in her notebook. While Dr. Thorne offered a vague recollection of treating Reed's daughter for a fever years ago, the room crackled with unspoken truths, and Poirot sensed each guest was hiding a piece of the puzzle. The detective then examined the manor's grounds more closely, focusing on the garden where the brass screw was found. He noticed a faint trail of disturbed soil leading to a tool shed, its door slightly ajar. Inside, he discovered a pair of gardening gloves stained with mud that matched the porch footprint's texture. The gloves were small, fitting a woman's hand or a slender man's, and tucked behind a rake was a cloth bundle containing a vial of clear liquid. Odourless, but suspicious. Poirot sealed it for the inspector to test, suspecting poison might yet play a role in the mystery. As evening fell, the guests gathered for a tense dinner, their appetites dulled by suspicion. Poirot steered the conversation to the lantern's destruction, noting how its fall required force. Someone had climbed to unscrew it before smashing it. He watched Victor's hands, rough from years of work, and Clara's, delicate but ink-stained. Lady Eleanor's fingers, adorned with rings, seemed too pristine for such a task, while Dr. Thorne's steady hands betrayed no tremor. The detective dropped a calculated hint. The lantern's screws were tampered with, n'est-ce pas? A task requiring precision. Clara flinched, and Victor's cigar paused mid-air. Later, Poirot cornered Hawkins in the pantry, pressing him about the manor's staff. The butler admitted a maid, Eliza, had been dismissed months ago after stealing a silver candlestick. She was Reed's niece, and her bitterness towards Sir Reginald was no secret. Poirot's mind raced. Eliza could be an unseen player, perhaps working with someone inside. He requested her last known address from the inspector, who confirmed she lived in a nearby village. The net was tightening, but the killer's identity remained elusive. As night cloaked the manor, Poirot stood by the library window, the darkness outside mirroring the mystery within. The debt from the sea pointed to Captain Reed, but the motives, greed, revenge, or loyalty, wove a complex web. The vial, the gloves, the photograph, and Clara's letter were threads he would pull, but carefully, lest the killer strike again. The manor's silence was a lie, and Poirot knew the truth would soon surface, like a tide that could not be stopped. The next chapter will plunge deeper into the past, as Poirot uncovers a betrayal that binds the guilty to the grave. Chapter 4. Echoes of the Past. The morning mist clung to Willowbrook Manor like a shroud, softening the edges of its stone facade but sharpening the tension within. Hercule Poirot stood in the study, a smaller room off the main hall, its walls lined with ledgers and maritime charts from Sir Reginald Hargrove's early days in the steel trade. The detective's sharp eyes scanned the faded documents, seeking the thread that tied the murder to the cryptic debt from the sea. The photograph of Lady Eleanor with Captain Amos Reed, the suspicious vial, and the gardening gloves weighed on his mind. The killer had left clues, but they were like ripples on water, visible yet fleeting, leading to deeper currents below. Poirot began the day by requesting a private audience with Lady Eleanor, whose composure had begun to fray. In the morning room, surrounded by delicate porcelain and wilting roses, she sat rigidly, her hands folded as if to anchor herself. Poirot produced the photograph from her jewellery box, placing it gently on the table. "Madame, this man, Captain Reed, He was more than a passing acquaintance, we? Her lips tightened, but after a long pause she spoke. Years ago, as a young woman in Liverpool, she had been engaged to Amos Reed, a charismatic shipbuilder with dreams of a merchant fleet. Sir Reginald, then an ambitious steel supplier, had befriended Reed, only to undercut his business with ruthless deals that left Reed bankrupt. Eleanor had broken off the engagement, choosing Reginald's wealth over Reed's ruin. I loved Amos once, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. But I made my choice. I thought it forgotten. Poirot noted the guilt in her eyes. Guilt that could breed secrets, or worse. Next, Poirot sought out Miss Clara Beaumont, whose nervous energy seemed to pulse with every step. He found her in the conservatory, sketching the manor's gardens, her pencil trembling slightly. Confronting her with the letter signed C and addressed to father, Poirot pressed gently but firmly. Mademoiselle, are you the daughter of Captain Amos Reed? Clara's face crumpled, and tears welled. She confessed. She was indeed Reed's daughter, sent to boarding schools after her father's ruin, raised on stories of Hargrove's betrayal. The letter was a draft, meant to explain her presence at the manor. She had come to confront Sir Reginald, not to kill him. I wanted answers, she said, not blood. Yet her sketches of the lantern, so precise, suggested an obsession that troubled Poirot. Could grief have turned to vengeance? The detective then turned to Dr. Elias Thorne, whose calm demeanour felt like a mask. In the manor's small medical room, where Thorne had set up a temporary office, Poirot questioned him about the vial of clear liquid found in the tool shed. Thorne adjusted his glasses, claiming ignorance, but offered that it could be a sedative, perhaps pilfered from his medical bag. Poirot's eyes lingered on the doctor's stopped pocket watch, still frozen at 11:47. A curious malfunction, Doctor, Poirot remarked. Thorne shrugged, saying it had been unreliable for weeks. Yet the detective suspected a deliberate act. Had Thorne stopped the watch to create an alibi, or to cover a moment he wished to hide? Victor Langston proved less forthcoming. Poirot found him in the billiard room, slamming balls across the table with barely contained frustration. When questioned about his failed shipping venture with Sir Reginald, Victor admitted to losing a fortune when Hargrove withdrew support, leaving him to face angry investors alone. Reginald played dirty, Victor growled, but I'm no killer. I fight with words, not daggers. Poirot noted the calluses on Victor's hands. Could they have unscrewed the lantern? Yet his boots, too large for the porch footprint, cast doubt on his involvement. Seeking more context, Poirot visited the village with the inspector, tracking down Eliza, the dismissed maid and Captain Reed's niece. In a modest cottage, Eliza, a wiry woman with sharp eyes, spoke bitterly of Sir Reginald. After her uncle's ruin, she had worked at the manor, hoping to uncover proof of Hargrove's misdeeds. She admitted to lingering near the estate, watching the lantern she believed symbolized her uncle's lost dreams. But she swore she was home the night of the murder, a claim her neighbour confirmed. Poirot, however, noticed a pair of small mud-stained shoes by her door, eerily similar to the porch footprint. Had Eliza lied, or was she another pawn in a larger game? Back at the manor, Poirot examined the maritime charts in the study, discovering a contract from 1916. It detailed a deal between Hargrove and Reed for steel plates used in naval ships, abruptly cancelled when Hargrove diverted the materials to a rival firm for triple the profit. A scribbled note in the margin, in Reed's hand, read, "Betrayed. The light will burn." The phrase echoed the threatening letters, linking Reed's ruin directly to the lantern's symbolism. Poirot's mind raced. Someone had revived Reed's vendetta, but who? As dusk settled, the guests gathered in the dining hall, their faces drawn under the chandelier's dim glow. Poirot dropped a subtle hint, mentioning the contract and Reed's note. Lady Eleanor's hand shook as she lifted her glass. Victor's jaw tightened. Clara stared at her plate, and Thorne's fingers brushed his watch. The room felt like a powder keg, each guest a spark waiting to ignite. Poirot knew the truth lay in their pasts, tangled in love, loss and betrayal. But the killer's next move loomed like a storm on the horizon. The next chapter will peel back more layers, as Poirot closes in on the heart of the conspiracy. Chapter 5. The Web of Motives. The evening sky over Willowbrook Manor bled crimson, as if mirroring the violence that had stained its halls. Hercule Poirot stood in the study, his gloved fingers tracing the edges of the 1916 contract that had sealed Captain Amos Reed's ruin. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and wax, but the detective's mind was sharper than ever, piecing together the fragments of a vendetta that had simmered for over a decade. The photograph of Lady Eleanor with Reed, Clara's confession as his daughter, the suspicious vial, and the mud-stained shoes at Eliza's cottage formed a constellation of clues, each pointing to a motive rooted in betrayal. Yet the killer's face remained hidden, and Poirot knew the manor's walls held more secrets waiting to be pried loose. Poirot began the evening by gathering the guests in the drawing room, where a fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced like spectres. He stood before them, his small frame commanding the room, and announced his intent to reconstruct the night of the murder. "Mes amis," he said, his voice steady, "the truth lies in the details, your movements, your secrets. Let us begin." He asked each guest to describe their actions after dinner, but this time with specifics: where they stood, what they saw, what they heard. Lady Eleanor, her sapphire gown replaced by sombre grey, repeated her claim of reading in her room, but added she had heard footsteps in the corridor around 11:30. Her eyes flicked to Victor as if accusing him silently. Victor, his cigar replaced by a tumbler of whiskey, insisted he was on the terrace, but now recalled seeing a shadow near the porch, too fleeting to identify. Clara, clutching her shawl, said she'd left the library briefly to fetch tea from the kitchen, passing the foyer where the brass lantern glowed. Dr. Thorne, his voice measured, claimed he'd been in his room, but admitted to opening his window for air, hearing a faint clatter outside, perhaps the lantern being tampered with. Poirot's questions grew sharper, probing inconsistencies. He turned to Clara, producing her notebook with its lantern sketches. "Mademoiselle, your drawings are meticulous, almost reverent. Why such focus on the lantern?" Clara's cheeks flushed, and she stammered that it symbolized her father's lost dreams, a beacon of his ambition that Hargrove extinguished. But Poirot noticed her hands trembling, her eyes darting to Lady Eleanor. Was Clara hiding a deeper connection to the manor's mistress? He then confronted Lady Eleanor about the photograph with Reed. She admitted to a youthful romance, but insisted it ended amicably. Yet her fingers twisted her wedding ring, and Poirot sensed a lingering shame. Perhaps she knew more about Reed's downfall than she let on. The detective's next move was to examine the tool shed more thoroughly, accompanied by the inspector. The gardening gloves, small and mud-stained, were now with the police for analysis, but Poirot scoured the shed for further clues. Behind a stack of flower pots, he found a hidden compartment in the wall containing a small brass key engraved with a wave motif, matching the lantern's nautical designs. The key was too delicate for the shed's crude lock, suggesting it opened something more refined. A safe, perhaps, or a secret drawer. Poirot pocketed it, his mind racing to connect it to the manor's secrets. Returning indoors, Poirot sought out the butler, Hawkins, in the servants' quarters. The man's stoic facade cracked slightly when questioned about Eliza, the dismissed maid. Hawkins revealed that Eliza had been close to Clara during her time at the manor, often whispering about justice for Amos. Poirot pressed further. Had Eliza ever mentioned a key or a hidden compartment? Hawkins shook his head, but his hesitation betrayed unease. The detective suspected the butler knew more about the staff's loyalties than he admitted, perhaps even shielding Eliza, or someone else. Poirot then turned his attention to Dr. Thorne's medical bag. requesting to inspect it under the pretense of checking for the vial's source. The bag, neatly organized, contained syringes, bandages, and several vials, but none matched the clear liquid found in the shed. However, tucked in a side pocket was a folded newspaper clipping from 1917, reporting a dockyard accident in Liverpool where a worker, injured by faulty steel from Hargrove's company, had died. The worker's name was listed as Thomas Reed, Amos's brother. Poirot's pulse quickened. Thorne's interest in the case suggested a personal connection, perhaps through treating Reed's family. When confronted, Thorne claimed the clipping was research for a medical study, but his stopped watch, still at 11:47, cast doubt on his candor. Victor Langston's temper flared when Poirot questioned him again, this time in the study. The detective produced the ledger from Victor's room, its angry scribbles detailing the shipping deal's collapse. "You lost everything to Hargrove's betrayal," Poirot said, his eyes locked on Victor's. The American slammed his fist on the desk, admitting he'd confronted Sir Reginald weeks ago, demanding reparations. "He laughed me off," Victor growled, "but I didn't kill him. I'd rather ruin him in business." Yet his clenched fists and the faint scent of cigar smoke on his coat kept him in Poirot's sights. As midnight approached, Poirot retreated to the study, where he spread out the clues: the brass key, the newspaper clipping, the contract, and Clara's sketches. The debt from the sea was no mere metaphor. It was a wound that had festered across years, binding the guests in a web of grudges. Lady Eleanor's past with Reed, Clara's filial loyalty, Thorne's hidden interest in the Reeds, and Victor's financial ruin all pointed to motives. But the key hinted at a tangible secret. Perhaps a document or object that could expose the killer. Poirot tested the key on the study's desk, finding a hidden drawer that sprang open. Inside was a single sheet, a handwritten confession from Sir Reginald, dated a month prior. "I wronged Amos Reed, and his blood is on my hands. The lantern lights my guilt." The words were a bombshell, but the drawer was empty of further clues. Had the killer already taken what they sought? The manor's silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant creak of floorboards. Poirot knew the killer was watching, waiting, perhaps planning another strike. The brass key burned in his pocket, a promise of answers, but also a warning that the truth came at a cost. The guests, now restless in their rooms, were pieces in a deadly game, and Poirot was determined to checkmate the murderer before the night ended. The next chapter will unravel the confession's weight, as Poirot hunts for the missing piece that will expose the killer's hand. If you're enjoying this twisting tale, hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything to us. Chapter 6. The Confession's Shadow. The night enveloped Willowbrook Manor in a velvet darkness, broken only by the faint glow of candles flickering in the hallways. Hercule Poirot sat alone in the study, the handwritten confession of Sir Reginald Hargrove spread before him on the desk, its words heavy with guilt. "I wronged Amos Reed, and his blood is on my hands. The lantern lights my guilt." The brass key that had unlocked the hidden drawer lay beside it, its wave motif glinting like a taunt. The confession was a revelation, but incomplete. Something was missing, a document or object that might name the killer. Poirot's little grey cells churned, weaving together the threads of betrayal, revenge, and hidden truths that bound the guests to the murder. The manor seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next act in this deadly drama. Poirot began the morning by summoning the inspector to the study, sharing the confession, but withholding the key's discovery for now. The inspector, a gruff man named Carter, confirmed that the police had found no fingerprints on the dagger, its handle wiped clean. The vial from the toolshed, however, tested positive for a rare sedative, one potent enough to slow a victim's reflexes but not lethal on its own. Could it have been used on Sir Reginald? Poirot mused aloud. Carter shook his head. Toxicology results showed no trace in the body. The sedative, then, was a red herring, or perhaps a tool for another crime yet to unfold. Poirot filed this away, his suspicion growing that the killer was playing a longer game. He next sought out Lady Eleanor, finding her in the conservatory, tending to a wilting orchid with unsteady hands. Poirot produced the confession, watching her closely. "Madame, your husband wrote of guilt over Amos Reed. Did he ever speak of this to you?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment her composure shattered. She admitted that Reginald had grown restless in recent months, muttering about old mistakes and locking himself in the study. She had assumed it was business stress, but now feared it was tied to Reed's ruin. "He changed after receiving those letters," she whispered, as if he knew the past was coming for him. Poirot noted a tear in her eye, genuine grief, or a performance to deflect suspicion. In the library, Poirot confronted Miss Clara Beaumont, whose connection to Amos Reed made her a pivotal figure. He asked about the confession, probing whether her father had ever hinted at Hargrove's guilt. Clara's voice trembled as she recounted her childhood, hearing tales of her father's shipyard dreams crushed by Hargrove's betrayal. "He drank himself to death," she said, her eyes blazing. "I came here to make Reginald admit it, not to kill him." But Poirot noticed a fresh page in her notebook, scrawled with the phrase, "The light burns for justice," echoing the threatening letters. Had Clara written them, or was she mimicking their style out of obsession? Her small hands, capable of fitting the muddy gloves, kept her in his sights. Dr. Elias Thorne was next, found in the dining hall, sipping tea with an air of detachment. Poirot questioned him about the newspaper clipping on Thomas Reed's death, pressing for details on his connection to the Reed family. Thorne admitted to treating Amos Reed's wife during her final illness, a fever that claimed her after the shipyard's collapse. "I saw their pain," he said, his voice low, "but I'm a doctor, not a vigilante." Yet his stopped watch, still at 11:47, gnawed at Poirot. When pressed, Thorne claimed it was a sentimental keepsake broken long ago. The detective's instincts screamed otherwise. Had Thorne been at the porch, tampering with the lantern when time seemed to stop? Victor Langston proved elusive, pacing the terrace with a fresh cigar, his temper barely leashed. Poirot confronted him about the confession, asking if Hargrove's guilt extended to their failed shipping deal. Victor's laugh was bitter. "Reginald ruined me, sure, but I rebuilt. Killing him wouldn't bring back my money." Yet Poirot noticed a burn mark on Victor's cuff, fresh and smelling faintly of brass polish. Had he handled the lantern before its destruction? Victor brushed it off as a cigar accident, but his defiance felt forced, a shield against scrutiny. Poirot then explored the manor's upper floors, seeking the lock that matched the brass key. In Sir Reginald's private office, a cramped room filled with dusty files, he found a small safe embedded in the wall, its lock bearing the same wave motif. The key fit perfectly, revealing a bundle of letters, not the threatening ones, but personal correspondence between Hargrove and Amos Reed from 1915. The letters revealed a friendship turned sour, with Reed accusing Hargrove of sabotaging his contracts for profit. One letter, dated just before Reed's bankruptcy, ended with a plea. "Spare my family, Reginald. The lantern will haunt you." The words mirrored the confession, confirming Hargrove's guilt, but offered no clear link to the killer. As noon approached, Poirot gathered the guests in the foyer, near where the brass lantern had once hung. He spoke of the confession, watching their reactions. Lady Eleanor's hands clenched. Clara's eyes darted to the floor. Thorne adjusted his glasses, and Victor's cigar paused mid-puff. "Someone among you knew of this guilt," Poirot said, "and used the lantern as a symbol of vengeance." He revealed the safe's letters, omitting the key, and asked if anyone had seen similar documents. Silence followed, broken only by Clara's sharp intake of breath. The tension was palpable, each guest a thread in a tightening noose. Outside, Poirot re-examined the porch, noticing a faint scratch on the railing, as if something heavy had been dragged. Perhaps the lantern before its fall. The mark aligned with the toolshed's path, suggesting the killer had planned the destruction carefully. He also found a single pearl earring, half buried in the gravel, its delicate design matching Lady Eleanor's jewellery. Had she been outside despite her claims, or was it planted to mislead? The clues were mounting, but the puzzle remained incomplete. As twilight fell, the manor's atmosphere grew suffocating, the guests avoiding each other's gaze. Poirot knew the confession had stirred the killer, who might act again to protect their secret. The safe's letters, the earring, and the burn on Victor's cuff were new pieces, but the sedative's purpose and the watch's frozen time lingered like ghosts. The truth was close, but danger closer still, lurking in the manor's shadowed corners. The next chapter will tighten the net, as Poirot confronts a hidden alliance that threatens to unravel the mystery. If you're gripped by this tale, please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Chapter 7. The Tangled Net. The air in Willowbrook Manor grew taut as a bowstring, each creak of the floorboards amplifying the unease that gripped its inhabitants. Hercule Poirot stood on the grand staircase, his silhouette sharp against the flickering candlelight, his mind a whirl of connections. Sir Reginald's confession, the brass key, the pearl earring, and the burn on Victor's cuff. The letters from Amos Reed, steeped in betrayal, pointed to a motive rooted in a long-ago wrong, but the killer's identity remained a shadow just out of reach. The manor was a chessboard, and Poirot sensed the next move could force a checkmate or spark another tragedy. He began the day by confronting Lady Eleanor in the morning room, where sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting intricate patterns on her pale face. Poirot held up the pearl earring, its delicate filigree glinting. "Madame, this was found near the porch. It is yours, no?" Her hand flew to her ear, confirming one was missing, but she insisted she'd lost it days ago during a walk. Her voice wavered, and Poirot's eyes narrowed. Her denial was too quick, her composure too brittle. He pressed further, asking about her knowledge of the safe's letters. She admitted Reginald had been secretive, often locking himself away, but claimed ignorance of their contents. Yet her fingers toyed with a sapphire brooch, a nervous tick that betrayed her calm facade. Next, Poirot sought Victor Langston in the billiard room, where the clack of balls echoed like a metronome. The detective pointed to the burn mark on Victor's cuff, its faint metallic scent unmistakable. "Monsieur, this suggests contact with the lantern's polish, perhaps when it was tampered with. Care to explain?" Victor's face reddened, and he snapped that he'd brushed against a candelabrum in the foyer. Nothing more. But Poirot noticed a fresh scratch on Victor's watch, its edge jagged as if caught on something sharp. Perhaps the lantern's screws. Victor's bluster felt like a shield, and Poirot resolved to watch him closely. In the library, Poirot found Miss Clara Beaumont, her notebook now filled with cryptic phrases. "The light accuses," "Justice in shadows." He questioned her about the earring, probing whether she'd seen Lady Eleanor near the porch. Clara's eyes flicked up, startled, and she mumbled that she'd noticed Eleanor pacing the gardens at dusk, days before the murder. Her hesitation suggested more. She was protecting someone, or perhaps deflecting blame. Poirot then asked about her father's letters, wondering if she'd known of the safe. Clara shook her head, but her fingers clutched her pencil tightly, snapping its tip. Her obsession with the lantern was clear, but was it born of grief or something darker? Dr. Elias Thorne was in the conservatory, examining a fern with clinical precision. Poirot confronted him about the stopped watch, suggesting it was no accident. Thorne's smile was thin as he claimed it was a habit, keeping the broken timepiece for sentiment. But Poirot's discovery of the newspaper clipping about Thomas Reed's death prompted a sharper question. Did you know Amos Reed's family beyond medical care? Thorne admitted to visiting their home after the shipyard's collapse, moved by their plight, but insisted his role was purely professional. Yet his steady hands, so adept with a scalpel, could have wielded the dagger or unscrewed the lantern. Poirot's next step was to revisit the safe in Sir Reginald's office, hoping for overlooked clues. The empty drawer mocked him, but a closer inspection revealed a faint indentation in its lining, as if a small book or ledger had once rested there. Had the killer taken it? He searched the room, finding a hidden panel behind a portrait of a ship, a frigate named the Brass Beacon. Inside was a single page, torn from a ledger listing payments to an unnamed party in 1917, signed with a lantern symbol. The amounts were staggering, suggesting a cover-up tied to Reed's ruin. Poirot's pulse quickened. This was the missing piece, a financial trail that could name the killer's motive. He then interviewed the butler, Hawkins, in the pantry, pressing him about the manor's visitors. Hawkins admitted that Eliza, the former maid, had been seen near the estate a week before the murder, delivering a package to Clara. What package? Poirot demanded. Hawkins described a small parcel, wrapped in brown paper, which Clara had quickly hidden. Poirot's mind raced. Had Eliza supplied Clara with the sedative, or perhaps the dagger? He dispatched the inspector to question Eliza again, suspecting her role was more than peripheral. As evening fell, Poirot orchestrated a tense gathering in the dining hall, the chandelier casting a cold glow over the guests. He revealed the ledger page, watching their reactions. Lady Eleanor's breath caught. Victor's glass froze midway to his lips. Clara's hands twisted in her lap, and Thorne's eyes narrowed behind his glasses. "This document," Poirot said, "suggests Sir Reginald paid to silence someone after Reed's ruin. Who among you knew of this?" Silence answered, but the air crackled with fear. Poirot then mentioned the package to Clara, and her face paled. She stammered that it was a book from Eliza, nothing more. But her trembling voice betrayed her. Outside, Poirot re-examined the porch railing's scratch, noticing its depth suggested a heavy tool, perhaps a wrench used to loosen the lantern. Near the steps, he found a single thread of blue silk, matching Lady Eleanor's gown from the night of the murder. Had she been involved in the lantern's destruction, or was it another planted clue? The manor's grounds seemed to whisper secrets, the wind carrying echoes of betrayal. As midnight loomed, Poirot stood in the foyer, the ghost of the brass lantern's glow haunting the space. The ledger page, the silk thread, and Clara's package were new threads in the web, but the killer's hand remained elusive. The guests were bound by lies, and Poirot sensed an alliance, perhaps between Clara and Eliza, or Eleanor and another, lurking beneath the surface. The truth was a tide rising, and he would not let it sweep him away. The next chapter will force secrets into the open, as Poirot's trap tightens around the guilty. If you're gripped by this mystery, please like and subscribe. Your support keeps us unraveling these tales. Chapter 8. The trap takes shape. The dawn broke over Willowbrook Manor with a pale, reluctant light, as if the sun itself hesitated to illuminate the secrets buried within its walls. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand foyer, his polished shoes silent on the marble floor, his mind a crucible of clues, the ledger page with its mysterious payments, the blue silk thread, and the package delivered to Clara Beaumont. The manor pulsed with suspicion, each guest a potential predator, and Poirot knew the killer was growing restless, their carefully laid plans fraying under his relentless scrutiny. Tonight, he would set a trap, using the manor's own shadows to draw the murderer into the open. Poirot began by revisiting the study, where the hidden safe and its damning contents had shifted the mystery's tide. He examined the ledger page again, noting the payments were dated shortly after Amos Reed's bankruptcy, addressed to an initialed recipient, LM. The initials sparked a theory. Could they belong to someone in the manor? Or perhaps an outsider tied to Reed's family? Poirot cross-referenced the initials against the guests. Lady Eleanor's maiden name was Morton, fitting the LM but no other names aligned. He tucked the page into his pocket, determined to confront her later, and turned his attention to the safe's lock, noticing faint scratches around the keyhole. Someone had tried to force it before the brass key was used, perhaps in haste or desperation. In the drawing room, Poirot gathered the guests, their faces drawn with fatigue and fear. He announced a reenactment of the murder night's events, claiming it would jog memories. "We shall retrace your steps, mes amis, and see what the lantern's light reveals." He instructed each to position themselves where they claimed to be at midnight. Lady Eleanor stood by the staircase, insisting she'd been in her room. Victor lounged near the terrace door, his cigar unlit but his eyes wary. Clara positioned herself near the library entrance, her fingers twisting her shawl. Dr. Thorne chose a spot by the window, claiming he'd been airing his room. Poirot watched closely, noting Victor's proximity to the porch and Clara's clear view of the foyer's lantern. As the reenactment unfolded, Poirot staged a deliberate distraction. He asked the butler, Hawkins, to drop a tray of glasses, mimicking the clatter of the lantern's fall. The crash echoed, and in the chaos, he observed the guests' reactions. Lady Eleanor flinched, her hand brushing her brooch as if for reassurance. Victor swore, his hand darting to his pocket. Clara froze. Her eyes locked on the foyer, while Thorne stepped back, his calm facade slipping for a moment. The test confirmed Poirot's suspicion. Someone had anticipated the noise, perhaps from familiarity with the lantern's destruction. He then confronted Clara about the package from Eliza, pressing her in the library's quiet corner. "Mademoiselle, what was in this parcel? The truth, s'il vous plaît." Clara's resolve crumbled, and she admitted it contained a locket, a keepsake from her father, Amos Reed, engraved with a lantern. She had planned to show it to Sir Reginald, hoping it would guilt him into confessing his betrayal. But when Poirot asked to see it, Clara's face fell. She claimed it was stolen from her room the night of the murder. The detective's instincts flared. The locket could be the missing piece from the safe, a symbol of Reed's vendetta. Poirot next sought Lady Eleanor in the conservatory, presenting the ledger page with the initials LM. Her eyes widened, and she stammered that the payments were likely for a charity she managed in Liverpool, unrelated to Reed. But her trembling hands betrayed her, and Poirot pressed. "Did you receive money to keep silent about Amos Reed's ruin?" She denied it, but her gaze flickered to the garden where the tool shed stood. Poirot noted her unease, suspecting she knew more about the payments than she admitted. Dr. Thorne was in the medical room, organizing his bag with meticulous care. Poirot questioned him about the scratches on the safe, suggesting a medical tool might have caused them. Thorne laughed, dismissing the idea, but offered to show his instruments. Among them, Poirot spotted a small scalpel with a worn handle, its edge sharp enough to nick metal. Thorne claimed it was for routine procedures, but Poirot's mind connected it to the safe's scratches, and perhaps the dagger's precision. Victor Langston, found in the garden, was less cooperative. Poirot asked about his pocket's contents during the reenactment, noting his quick movement. Victor produced a lighter, claiming it was all he carried, but Poirot spotted a faint bulge in his jacket. A small tool, perhaps a wrench, matching the porch railing's scratch. When pressed, Victor admitted to carrying a pocket knife for cigars, but swore he never touched the lantern. His defensiveness only deepened Poirot's suspicion. As night fell, Poirot devised his trap. He announced to the guests that the police had found a new clue, a locket, hidden in the manor, containing evidence of the killer's identity. In truth, no locket had been found, but Poirot instructed Hawkins to leave the study door unlocked, the safe open, and a decoy locket placed inside. He positioned himself in the shadows, watching from a concealed alcove. Hours passed in silence until footsteps echoed near midnight. A figure, cloaked in darkness, slipped into the study, their silhouettes small and agile. They reached for the decoy locket, But Poirot stepped forward, candle in hand, revealing their face. The trap had sprung, but the killer's motives were still veiled, and the manor's secrets pulsed like a heartbeat. The guests, unaware of the confrontation, slept uneasily, while Poirot prepared to unravel the final threads of deception. The next chapter will expose the figure in the study, as Poirot's gambit brings the truth into the light. If you're hooked on this mystery, please like and subscribe. Your support fuels our storytelling. Chapter 9. The Light of Truth. The study of Willowbrook Manor was a cocoon of shadows, the candle in Hercule Poirot's hand casting a trembling glow as he stepped from his alcove. The figure at the safe froze. The decoy locket, a cheap trinket planted by Poirot, clutched in their hand. The air crackled with tension, the silence broken only by the distant tick of a clock. Poirot's voice cut through the darkness, calm but unyielding. Mademoiselle Clara, the game is over. Clara Beaumont, her face pale as moonlight, stood trembling, her wide eyes caught between fear and defiance. The trap had worked, but Poirot knew the truth was still a puzzle, its final pieces scattered among the manor's secrets. He led Clara to the drawing room, where the inspector waited, summoned earlier by a discreet note. The other guests, roused, from their beds, gathered in nightclothes, their expressions a mix of confusion and dread. Poirot held up the decoy locket, explaining his ruse to draw out the killer. This locket, he said, was believed to hold the key to Sir Reginald's murder. Only the guilty would seek it. Clara's shoulders slumped, but she protested, her voice breaking. I only wanted my father's locket back. It was his, not evidence of murder. Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind remained sharp. Clara's presence at the safe was damning, yet her motive unclear. He began unravelling the clues, addressing the guests as the firelight flickered across their faces. The ledger page with LM initials pointed to Lady Eleanor Morton, who had received payments after Amos Reed's ruin. Poirot confronted her, producing the page. Madame, these funds, were they to silence your knowledge of Reginald's betrayal? Eleanor's composure cracked, and she admitted to accepting money to fund a charity, unaware it was tied to Reed's downfall. I thought it was business, she whispered, not blood money. Her guilt was real, but Poirot sensed she was no killer. Her earring on the porch was likely a careless loss, not a sign of guilt. Turning to Victor Langston, Poirot pointed to the burn on his cuff and the scratch on his watch. Monsieur, you handled the lantern, oui? Perhaps to loosen its screws. Victor's face reddened, and he confessed to inspecting it days before, curious about its craftsmanship, but swore he hadn't tampered with it the night of the murder. His pocket knife, produced reluctantly, was too blunt for the dagger's wound, and his large boots didn't match the porch footprint. Poirot nodded, dismissing him as the killer, but noting his recklessness. Dr. Elias Thorne's stopped watch drew Poirot's scrutiny next. Doctor, your timepiece, frozen at 11:47. Why? Thorne's calm faltered, and he admitted to stopping it deliberately, a habit from his days timing patients' pulses. But Poirot pressed about the newspaper clipping on Thomas Reed's death. Thorne revealed he'd been Amos Reed's friend, witnessing his family's collapse. I kept the clipping to remind me of justice undone, he said, but denied murder. His scalpel, though sharp, was too small for the dagger's wound, and his steady hands suggested control, not violence. Poirot then focused on Clara, holding up her notebook with its lantern sketches and cryptic phrases. Mademoiselle, your obsession with the lantern, your father's locket, did it drive you to vengeance? Clara sobbed, admitting she'd sent the threatening letters, hoping to scare Reginald into confessing his sins. The locket, stolen from her room, contained a note from her father accusing Hargrove of sabotage. She'd gone to the safe, believing it held her locket, not knowing Poirot's trap. But the muddy footprint, too small for Victor or Thorn, fit Clara's slippers perfectly. "I didn't kill him!" she cried. "I was in the library when he died." Poirot paused, his mind sifting the evidence. The footprint, the sedative vial, and the blue silk thread suggested a second player. He turned to the butler, Hawkins, who had lingered silently. "Monsieur Hawkins, you spoke of Eliza, the maid, delivering a package to Clara. Did you see her near the manor that night?" Hawkins hesitated, then admitted Eliza had been spotted in the garden, claiming to retrieve a forgotten shawl. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Eliza, Amos Reed's niece, had motive and opportunity. Her small shoes matched the footprint, and the sedative could have been hers, intended to subdue Reginald before the dagger struck. The inspector dispatched officers to fetch Eliza, who arrived, defiant but shaken. Poirot confronted her with the footprint and the vial. "You sought justice for your uncle, non? You loosened the lantern, left the footprint, and struck when Reginald was alone." Eliza's resolve broke, and she confessed. She'd planned to confront Reginald, using the sedative to calm him, but rage overtook her when he dismissed her uncle's memory. She stabbed him, smashing the lantern to symbolize his guilt. Clara's letters had inspired her, but they were not allies. Clara's grief had been genuine, not murderous. As Eliza was led away, the guests exhaled, the manor's tension easing like a storm passing. Poirot stood by the foyer, the ghost of the brass lantern lingering in his mind. The truth had surfaced, but at a cost. Grief, betrayal, and vengeance had woven a deadly tapestry. The final chapter will tie up the loose ends as Poirot reflects on justice and the lantern's haunting legacy. If you're gripped by this tale, please like and subscribe. Your support keeps these mysteries alive. Chapter 10. The Lantern's Final Glow. The morning sun pierced the fog surrounding Willowbrook Manor, bathing its stone walls in a light that felt both cleansing and merciless. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand foyer, where the brass lantern once hung, its absence a silent testament to the tragedy that had unfolded. The guests, Lady Eleanor, Victor Langston, Miss Clara Beaumont, and Dr. Elias Thorne, gathered in the drawing room, their faces etched with exhaustion and relief, though the weight of truth still lingered. Eliza, the former maid and Amos Reed's niece, had been taken into custody, her confession to Sir Reginald Hargrove's murder seemingly closing the case. Yet Poirot's little grey cells hummed with unresolved threads: the sedative vial, the blue silk thread, the locket, and the ledger's payments. The detective knew the lantern's light had one final revelation to cast, and he would unveil it now, before the manor could bury its secrets again. Poirot began by addressing the group, his voice steady as he paced before the fireplace. "Mes amis, the murder of Sir Reginald Hargrove was a tapestry of vengeance, woven from the threads of a past betrayal. But the truth is not singular. It is a mosaic, each piece revealing a part of the whole." He held up the ledger page with the initials LM, turning to Lady Eleanor. "Madam, these payments were indeed for your charity, but they were also hush money, paid to ensure your silence about Amos Reed's ruin. You knew of Reginald's sabotage, did you not?" Eleanor's face crumpled and she nodded, tears spilling. She had loved Amos once, and when Reginald destroyed him, she accepted the payments out of guilt, believing they would help others. Her earring, lost in the garden, was a careless mistake, not a sign of murder, but her silence had fueled the tragedy. Next, Poirot faced Victor Langston, whose burn-marked cuff and scratched watch had raised suspicion. "Monsieur, you inspected the lantern out of curiosity, as you claimed, but also resentment. You lost a fortune to Reginald's betrayal in the shipping deal, oui?" Victor's jaw tightened, and he admitted to confronting Reginald days before, threatening to expose his past, but his blunt honesty and oversized boots cleared him of the killing. His role was anger, not violence. The burn came from a clumsy moment with a candelabrum, not the lantern's polish, and the scratch from a fall during his terrace pacing. Dr. Elias Thorne's stopped watch. A newspaper clipping drew Poirot's scrutiny next. "Doctor, you were Amos Reed's friend, and your watch was no sentimental relic. It was stopped to mark the moment you saw Eliza in the garden. Planning her act, Thorne's calm facade broke, and he confessed to noticing Eliza's furtive movements that night. He hadn't acted, torn between loyalty to Reed's memory and his duty as a physician. The clipping about Thomas Reed's death was his reminder of injustice, but his hands, though skilled, had not wielded the dagger. The scalpel's scratches on the safe were from a failed attempt to access it years ago, seeking proof of Hargrove's guilt for Amos. Poirot then turned to Clara Beaumont, whose tearful confession had nearly masked her role. "Mademoiselle, your letters set this tragedy in motion. You sought to scare Reginald into admitting his sins, but your words ignited Eliza's rage." Clara sobbed, admitting she'd sent the threatening letters, copying her father's phrases from his old letters to Hargrove. The locket, stolen from her room, had contained Amos's final note, accusing Reginald of sabotage, a note Eliza found and used to fuel her vendetta. Clara's sketches of the lantern were her way of grappling with her father's loss, not a plan for murder. Her small slippers matched the porch footprint, but only because she'd followed Eliza that night, suspecting her intentions but too late to stop her. Finally, Poirot revealed the full truth about Eliza. Mademoiselle Eliza, driven by her uncle Amos's ruin and her father Thomas's death, saw the lantern as a symbol of Hargrove's greed. She loosened its screws, intending to confront Reginald, and used the sedative to calm him. But when he mocked her pain, she struck with the dagger, smashing the lantern to mark her justice. The blue silk thread, Poirot explained, was a deliberate plant by Eliza, torn from Eleanor's gown to cast suspicion. The sedative vial, meant for Reginald, was discarded when rage overtook her plan. The locket, taken from Clara, was hidden in Eliza's cottage, recovered by the police, its note confirming Reginald's betrayal. Poirot stepped to the centre of the room, his eyes sweeping over the guests. The brass lantern was a beacon, not only to murder but to truth. Each of you carried a piece of this tragedy, guilt, anger, silence or grief, but only one hand struck the blow. The guests sat in stunned silence, the weight of their shared past settling like dust. Lady Eleanor's complicity, Victor's resentment, Thorne's inaction, and Clara's letters had all fed the fire, but Eliza's vengeance had lit the flame. As the inspector prepared to depart with Eliza, Poirot stood by the foyer, gazing at the empty hook where the lantern once hung. The manor felt lighter, its secrets laid bare, but the cost was heavy, lives ruined, trust shattered. "Justice," Poirot murmured, "is a light that burns, but does not always heal." He turned to the guests, bidding them farewell, his work complete. The manor would fade into memory, but the lantern's glow would haunt them all. As Poirot stepped into the morning light, the case closed. He tipped his hat to Willowbrook Manor, a final nod to its ghosts. The mystery was solved, the truth illuminated, and the brass lantern's legacy sealed in the hearts of those who remained. Thank you for joining this twisting tale of murder and betrayal. If you've been gripped by Hercule Poirot's unravelling of the brass lantern, please like, comment and subscribe. Your support means the world to us and keeps these stories alive.